So we'll start with the structured part of the conversation.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Ruth can type her sessions in, and then her ideas in.
I think everybody that I can see who's on here knows each other. So the meet the team is not very good. We're doing the P&P thing.
We got some more people
The
joining
together
right
mode
now.
wave for everybody.
We got more people joining right now, Mike. So you might want to just, pretend.
Don't
pretend
shirk
they
your
don't know who we
duties.
are.
All right, fine. We're digging in today. That the topic was about working across multiple subsidiaries with Microsoft 365, and this group that you see on the screen kind of represents a variety of points of view about pretty much anything, but in today's context, M365 and SharePoint, from developer to information architect to IT pro, etc. So let's come back to.
And if we're not qualified for it, we'll still have opinions.
Yeah, we'll make it up on the fly. We're not above that.
Yeah. We have many opinions, and we're generous with them.
Very.
So today's hosting multiple
Whether you want us to be
reviews.
or not.
Yeah, exactly. So here's we're going to frame it with a couple of different models for parent sub structures. So things we've been asked from other clients as we've been through this before. Some key considerations, things you need to think about, and some incremental resources. So let me. I'll talk about the models because I'm the one who put the slide together like 15 minutes ago. I think we talked about two different ones, right? A parent company that has a pool of shared services that all the subsidiaries avail themselves of. So they really work more like business units. It's less of and this is less about the ownership structure strictly from like an accounting point of view and more of an operational structure. Where do certain operations take place? They take place at the parent, or they take place autonomously at the subs, and the parent just writes a check or collects a check every quarter. So these are the two different models, really, with those shared services living up at the parent or below in the subsidiary. That has a big impact on how certain things are done. Any questions about this or any comments from the team? Love the PowerPoint karaoke. You're seeing it for the first time.
Impressive. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Impressive. Gorgeous.
The parent company on the left looks like a hat. I just wanted to say.
It's like a hat.
Looks like a hat.
Not even a stylish hat.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember those like one of those pork pie hats or whatever. Yeah.
Bowler hat.
Oh yeah.
So some asks, and Derek, I think you fielded this one in the past. We have multiple subsidiaries with different operations with common ownership. Can they live together?
Yeah, and I think in that model, that's the model where you've got subsidiary A and they've got their what's the M one? Manufacture. They do manufacturing and processing and all those kinds of things. But then they have a parent company that handles HR, finance, all of those big globally kind of things. I worked with a very large company that had that model, and I think personally, I would not put them in the same tenant. I think we had a really lively discussion. I would actually break, if you had two subsidiaries and a parent, I would actually put all three of them in three separate tenants, and then, provide guest access or some kind of access to the parent for that information. Because I think that information needs to be, the parent information will have some standalone information that the other folks shouldn't see. So I think it lets you get granular with the amount of stuff that folks that are in the subsidiary can actually see. Sort of my thought. I think, yeah.
Can you see the notes? Are the slide notes visible to everybody in my presenting? I've never presented in this mode before.
They are not.
Looks exactly the way you want it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Derek, we talked about the challenges, and I think you summarized it, right? Shared access means either you're over permissioned a lot, or you're creating separate sites for the same function, and then you even need to audience target content. And we talked about the pain of search getting really ugly if you don't rigorously manage permissions either. You can get a lot of noise in search that way too, correct?
Right. So if you do make a decision to have everybody in the same tenant, that gets really ugly really fast, because then you have one site for subsidiary A, and they've got HR and finance. So you've got subsidiary A finance, subsidiary B finance, and should sub A be able to see sub B's finance? Maybe, maybe not. Should they see their payroll stuff? I think you want to make sure people are getting the right information that's relevant to them, and you shouldn't ask them to sift through that in search. So, polluting the search if you choose to put everything in one tenant gets really yucky really fast. And I think you end up with a permissioning and a search nightmare there. And that's why I would recommend splitting them out.
Right. I mean, if you do keep it in the same tenant and you do want to only let subsidiary A see finance here and B finance there or whatever you called them, I mean, you can do it with permissioning. They won't see stuff they're not permissioned to do, but you're taking on a burden of making sure that every site or every library is permissioned correctly, as well as managing the membership of those two groups in whatever manner you're deciding. Usually that goes back to Active Directory, and because it's not in the SharePoint world, you're dealing with a different set of people, and that can be tricky to manage.
The other thing is it makes the use of the everyone and everyone except external things a little more overarching than you might want them to be. And a bunch of stuff falls under that. I mean, we talk about the paradigm of having the sites where the work gets done and then the public display sites. A lot of places that everyone except external makes sense in a whole bunch of places. And if you have all these subsidiaries, that might not be the case.
Yeah.
Mark also dropped into the comments some information about the information barriers from the M365 compliance piece. So, Mark, do you want to speak to that at all? I don't know if anyone on our team's had hands-on experience with that.
I've played with it a little,
yeah.
Just kind of the demonstration stuff. So Mark might have more to offer. But for those that haven't played with it, it's this idea of putting. I think they use the phrase Chinese wall or something. But like, think about a classic publishing thing where you don't want ad sales and the editorial folks to be able to cross-pollinate and see things that the other one's doing, so the ad sales don't impact what the editorial people see.
Sure.
So it's this idea that you're all in the same tenant, but people in this group can't communicate with people in this group. They can't IM them. They can't email them. I don't remember if that is if there's a way to do that, so you can say sites that allow people from this group can't also allow people from this group. I don't know if it handles the specific thing or not, but it is part of this consideration, I suppose.
I think a lot of legal applications for that too, right? If you're working on matters for clients and there's potential for conflict.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
If Todd sues Simpraxis and the lawyer works for both Todd and Simpraxis, they could have different teams and they don't want to.
Well, when Todd sues Simpraxis again,
yeah, good point, Mark, about the FinServ, right? The trading desk and the energy analysis groups should be
that's another good example.
Yeah. Or in life sciences, you've got the medical affairs and medical science liaisons in the R&D side of the business and the sellers in the commercial side of the business, and there are pretty rigorous controls around who can do what there as well.
That seems super advanced.
I would
Mark
think.
says that some serious config and admin, right? So you have to think about not just do the tools support it, but do the people in your organization have the skills and interest and time and all the other good stuff to actually keep it working correctly?
Because your organization has to set up that for success. Like, they can't just, somebody should go turn this on. Like, that's not what this is. That's like,
because and people will have this annoying habit of sort of gnawing at the wall to make a hole in it so that they can talk to the people on the other side. So you've got to really stay on top of it if you set up these tools.
Like mice.
That's what I was thinking.
Couple of considerations that we talked about. Permissions, I think we've already touched on. Multiple domains in the same tenant was a scenario, I think, so that Todd brought up, or Mark.
Yeah, so this is, and by this one, this gets kind of confusing. By that, we're talking about internet domains, DNS domains, not Windows domains. And so this is something that surprises folks once in a while. So Mark and I wanted to talk about that it is completely possible, and I would say probably happens in 95% of all tenants. You have multiple domains in a tenant. So you have whatever whatever on Microsoft.com is. but you can have, Contoso.com and Fabricam.com and AdventureWorks.com inside of there. So from this discussion, that means if I've got a company, so when Contoso acquires AdventureWorks, all of those old AdventureWorks email addresses can still work. Those folks can still log in with the UPN of, Todd at AdventureWorks and all of that. So it can make some of those things. Or Todd at Contoso.com can also have the email address Todd at AdventureWorks. You can have unlimited email addresses essentially. So there is support for inside of the tenant has support for all of that. But the thing to keep in mind is the whatever.onmicrosoft.com and the whatever.sharepoint.com. There can be mostly only one of those. Though now we have the ability to rename tenants, and there's some shenanigans that go along with the redirecting. So in theory, you could have two, but one would just bounce to the other.
Can't have two concurrently.
Yeah, and the only exception to that is like those 30 companies in the world that have custom SharePoint domains, but you can't get them anymore. And
no.
Vanity SharePoint online domains. They're holdovers from back in the original
BPOS.
Online. Yep.
They've earned that.
Facebook
They've earned the right to do that.
Domains, so.
Yeah. I saw somebody post that October 4th should now be known as BGP Awareness Day, and
I saw that.
I love it.
Yeah, we could have pivoted to just a half hour of Todd telling us what broke.
Yeah. As an IT nerd, it was fascinating watching that whole thing unravel.
Yeah, that Cloudflare article was exceptional. That really broke it down.
Yeah.
Way more detail than I'm equipped to handle.
It was good stuff.
Do you want to talk about AED Premium? We talked about good people data being crucial but rare. Mark, I think this is a soapbox that you have frequently stood on over time.
Well, I think that originally, hold on, Mark. I think that originally came from we were talking about and got confused by on Monday in our prep session about what licenses you need to be able to create dynamic groups so you can do audience targeting on dynamic groups. And that was just documentation unfortunateness. But effectively, I think Todd answered the question.
I think we've got a slide on this, don't we, Mike?
We do not.
Oh,
no, I didn't get a slide on this.
Oh, you asked me for the link, so okay.
Yeah, no, I think you put the link in the resources.
I put a link in the resources, Todd. Yeah, to what you indicated.
So Todd can butt in anytime he wants, but effectively, the ability to create a dynamic group based on an AAD property only needs one. Only needs one user to have an AAD premium license to set up the group and be part of the group, and then thereby you get that dynamic group. So you could say, I want to create a dynamic group and use some AAD property to define that group, and then do audience targeting for that group, which could help you with that whole multi-subsidiaries all under one tenant scenario, where you have sort of these very disparate business units that sort of operate in and of themselves, and you need to sort of wall off an area of SharePoint for them. You can do that with audience targeting and dynamic groups, but that takes some premium licenses. It's just not as many as you think it. So that link helps with that. Now, then there's the other piece, which I interrupted Mark for, but he's like, what? What were we going to talk about?
Well, I mean, we were, when we were talking about, we all believed that it was everybody in the organization had to have a license for that. And it's quite a twist when we figured that out. Which part was it I was about to talk about?
You were talking about properties and needing to keep that
right. So it's yes, I did go on diatribe on this the other day, didn't I? So most organizations have pretty bad people data. So if you're going to do any one of the things that are on this page, really, you have to have excellent people data and be willing to maintain it. That sounds like such a simple statement, but most organizations that I've ever worked with, do not have good people data. So if you're gonna use that as the tent pole, you've really got to commit to it. You've got to get resourcing for it. You got to get budget for it. Whatever it is, it takes, and it needs to become somebody's problem to make sure that that data is valid all the time. And I I go on and on and on about this, but I mean, literally, I've never seen an organization with really good data. When we were doing a session about the Microsoft 365 maturity model the other day, Tara Saylor actually said her relatively large organization has great AD data, and I was like, whoa, okay, there's one. But it's just such an unusual thing to see that there's good data.
Yeah, and it makes all of this really hard when you don't. So
it does. It does, because the tools support all of the good things that you would need to do. But you have to have the data.
Yeah. Garbage in, garbage out. What's global issues? I don't know what that one is.
I think we talked about if some of those subsidiaries are international, are there issues regarding data sovereignty?
Yeah.
Like where the tenant is hosted. We talked about performance. Like, doesn't matter a lot from a user experience point of view, but some of the things you're doing at the system level, large scale scrapes or imports or migrations, et cetera, you see a performance hit there. And we talked about multi-geo as well.
Yeah. And to tell you what Mike already just told you. So when you're considering doing, depending on how the acquisition or whatever looks, if you have data sovereignty issues, you can bring them into your tenant, but have their data stored wherever their data needs to be stored legally. So that's not a concern. We've seen that in the past. We now have this multi-geo functionality, so that can be in one tenant, controlled in one place. But we did want to say that the multi-geo stuff might result in faster access. So if somebody, in your French subsidiary, if their data is kept in a German data center, it might be faster than if it's in a North American data center. But Microsoft has been very clear that that is not anything that they care about or not anything they support. Their multi-geo is strictly about data sovereignty. So don't think about that.
One thing on sort of global deployments and multi-geo is that while you can get data sovereignty for the data, the user profile service that may have that AAD data is actually not geo-targeted. So if you've got an entity in the UK in a UK data center and you've got entity in the US in a US data center, that data is replicated back and forth in the user profile service. So both users' data is the same in both.
Yeah, good point.
I was schooled by Microsoft when I brought that to their attention, that it was never intended to be used for data sovereignty. The user profile service was never intended to be used for data sovereignty, only for user profiles. So
School of hard knocks.
Exactly. Sounds convenient for me.
Great.
Does anybody on the call have scenarios that you're dealing with that we're not touching on here? I'm just curious if there are any challenges that you've solved in interesting ways. Okay.
No.
Mike Dixon asked.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
I got one for you.
Sure, go ahead. Hi, Caleb.
So the case of the external user who needs to be treated like an internal user while still retaining external user privileges. So I'm in the insurance industry. We have what we call captive agents. They are agents that work for another company. They are employed not by us. They need access to our SharePoint tenant as those external users. And they may or may not have Office 365. We want to be able to talk to our LDAP, which is not Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, at least not the primary, and be able to get the users out of there and still provision them as guests. So highly complex, I think, or so I've been told by our AD guys. And the using it in SharePoint is easy once you get the users there, right? Because I think the dynamic groups handle that.
Yeah, I think we see, and Todd's going to jump in right as soon as I botch this up.
Yes.
I think we tend to see two different scenarios there. Either people create those users essentially as internal users in a different OU, in Active Directory. With whatever your LDAP provider would be, it might be a little bit different. Or they are actually external users. And it depends on what they need to do once they get there and what security problems you're trying to solve. Because you can make an external user a member of a team, for example, and they have pretty much the rights that they need to do anything inside a team site that you've given them access to. So it really depends on what kind of actions you're trying to support. Coming back to that horrible word requirements again, the tech probably supports it, but what would the reason be that you'd need one of those two approaches?
Yeah, so they need to be able to get to selected systems, but not get the access that everyone except external users would give them if they were. So like we have a process where we can take somebody in. So if you came to us as a consultant, we would put you into our Active Directory. You would be treated like an employee while you were engaged with us as a consultant. You would have access to all general access stuff, but we also have a termination policy that's very quick and works. But for these captive agents, then we need a way that they can get in. We have a provisioning process in that other LDAP, and we can synchronize, but the federation of those users and treating them as guests at the same time seems to be causing our security people headaches.
Yeah, that everyone except external users thing is really, really useful unless you're adding outsiders into Active Directory all the time, because then they're not external users anymore. So that's probably part of the push me, pull you here. It actually might be better not to set them up in your LDAP provider and treat them as external users the way Microsoft 365 treats them, and then they're not going to be polluting your LDAP data.
Yeah, or try not to, or don't try to keep LDAP and Azure Active Directory synchronized.
Right. Or but again, I would take it back to, well, what is it that they need to access and what do they need to be able to do with this stuff? So for example, it's doubtful that you would want them to access your intranet if you have your intranet on SharePoint. That's one of the places where we do everyone except external users usually, unless there's some weird reason why we have to use a group that we've created, often a dynamic group, that defines, maybe employees without contractors or whatever it is.
Right.
But then that just gets messier and messier and messier. So,
well, it's insurance, of course it's messy.
Well, but it sometimes it becomes messy, not for any particular reason other than people think, oh, well, we have to do it the way we always did it. And so that it might be some of that sort of on-prem security thinking that contradicts the way the cloud works. And I don't want to say the cloud is special from that perspective, but like when you had to let people in through a VPN and sort of slice up what they could get to in the VPN, that's a very different scenario than we have this one platform that has a nice gate in front of it already. Let's let people in to do the work that they need to do. We don't have to worry about whether they're getting into your mainframe databases or something, because it's not that gate. If that makes any sense. If I'm using my metaphors properly.
Any comment from Mark or Todd on William Gunning's note about changing the guest user attribute?
Hey, Bill, how are you? You can change the guest user attribute to member using PowerShell and create a dynamic group that filters out member with whatever in the UPN. Oh yeah, that's an interesting idea. I don't know how that would work. Todd, does that make sense to you?
Because you have to make somebody a member if you want to give them a license. So you can actually license guest users. Yeah.
Yeah, and that ext, that's the prefix that Azure puts into guest users so that they're easy to pick out.
Yeah, I wish you could edit the logic behind external users. Then you could extend that logic, external users, and yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever toggled the members parameter to try to tweak that any. That's an interesting idea.
I think we know what Todd's going to be doing over his lunch break.
Since his is coming up.
Eating SpaghettiOs and playing with PowerShell.
Yep.
Are we? Sorry, go ahead.
I think just one point. I think as we've been kicking this around, one of the things that is very clear, and I'll reiterate it, is that there are multiple parties in all of this that you have to make sure are on the same page. So, for instance, you have to get your security folks and your Active Directory folks and your SharePoint folks. All of these people have to essentially be sitting around a virtual table and agree that this is how it's going to work and this is what everyone's responsibility is going to be, or none of this holds together when you're building out these scenarios with subsidiaries or different business units or whatever. That is very, very hard to do. So that's why I think sometimes the tendency is to say, well, let's just do 2 tenants, because then there's this platinum
Real Chinese wall.
Yeah, it's a wall that's made out of lead or something that I mean, it's an impermeable membrane, but that creates a whole bunch of other problems because every once in a while people are going to have to work together.
Yeah, and something we didn't add to this, and it's mostly because I don't understand it well enough to speak about it, is the Azure B2B and Azure B2C stuff. So business to business and business to customer. So this is the idea that you can have 2 separate Azure ADs, and there's a courting process and exchanging of gifts and all that, and then you can add users back and forth between them. It sounds like it's a good idea, but I've never gotten to really dig into it with a customer, so I don't know the ins and outs very well. But it sounds like it might be the solution for some of this.
We did it at Shire. When Shire bought back Salta, I believe they used B2B accounts, and there were headaches around access. Dave could probably give us some more detail on that if he remembers them. I know Tony and Dave probably remember it best. I do remember we used that for a while, and it wasn't pretty.
Yeah.
So since we're almost at time, let me put it out there one more time. But I think Mark has submitted one. Mark, not Anderson.
Not me.
Mark.
Not me.
The other Mark.
I didn't do it.
The better Mark. No, I'm kidding. That's not
Wow.
really true. Not what I think. We're trying a new thing in crowdsourcing of our live people on the call today, what they think we should talk about, if they have ideas for what we should talk about next week. We have one idea out there already from Mark. We have one sort of in our back pocket as well. But if anybody has some ideas for what we should talk about next week and feel brave and wants to come off mute and talk about it or put it in the chat, that would be a lovely. Mike, is there any talk from Microsoft around the extended capabilities of user classes in the SPO? So I can actually sort of speak to that. The way of the path there is graph, and I have not heard anything, even if I had, I couldn't tell you, but I have not heard anything about what they're going to do with SharePoint Online profiles, but the extensibility is in the graph and it will absolutely stay there. It won't come, more capabilities will not come to the user profile service.
So one question I had about that, Mike, was, and I was going to be around what Julie was asking, is have you extended the user profile service and added properties there? And does that scratch the itch that you're trying to scratch with your question?
I think what I'm really looking for is the ability to, kind of define members of a segment of a company in there into more logical sorts of groups, and maybe have conditional things happen based on that membership.
Yeah, so in your question, you mentioned SPO specifically, which made me think of user profile and not graph, because you had put some focus on it.
Yeah.
We have absolutely at customer sites added a property or use an existing property to marry users up to specific departments, accounting, HR, IT, whatever, and then used audiences inside of SPO to expose things to them. That's not security. That's presentation, but that gets you sort of there. But like Julie said, if you want to do it at the dynamic group level, that's an Azure AD thing. So then you would have to do it in graph.
Which you can totally do. That it's actually more simple than it sounds. But yeah.
Hey, Julie, I had an idea about the next topic.
Yeah.
We've been doing a lot with user profiles on one client. I'd love to have a guest. I'd love to ask Bo to join us to talk about some of the fresh hell that he's been through with things like syncing user pictures, extending profile.
That's a
The
good one.
profile properties conversation, I think, would be right up his alley, given what he's done for us.
Yeah, that's a
And
good one too.
Derek and I've done some of that for customers in the past as well.
Yeah.
And I'm using it for search right now for an employee directory issue. Yeah, that's a possibility too. How about we do this? Because we have the one from Mark and Ruth is going to add some stuff and we have that idea. So we're going to do like roulette and we'll start tweeting what we decide on in the next.
Spin the wheel.
Yeah.
Oh, Mike Dixon likes the
Maybe we'll-
profile.
And
pics.
that gives.
Maybe we'll do
Cool.
a Twitter
One-
poll.
Yeah, we'll do a Twitter poll. That's a great idea, Derek.
All
That's
right,
what we'll
cool.
do. So we'll do a Twitter poll based on all the ideas. That gives Ruth a couple hours to get her ideas in, and we'll see what people think.
And Ruth, you had a question about a Power App thing. If you want to put it in the chat, then maybe we can do it offline and get you an answer to your question in the chat.
Awesome. Okay,
Okay.
cool.
Sounds
Well, thanks,
great. Thank you,
everyone.
everybody, for joining us.
All right.
Please vote on the Twitter poll, and we look forward to joining you in 2 weeks. Thanks,
Get
everybody.
out there and vote, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
See ya.